Picture this. You're standing in the middle of a city. Cars can't reach you. There are no roads, just water everywhere. This city has been here for 1,500 years. It has survived plagues, wars, floods, and empires. And it's built on something that should make it impossible: mud. No concrete foundation, no bedrock, just soft, wet earth at the bottom of a lagoon. And yet, Venice stands. It thrives. Millions visit every single year. But here's what nobody tells you. Venice shouldn't exist at all. By every law of engineering, it should have sunk centuries ago. So, how is it still here? Today, we're going to answer that. We'll uncover how ancient builders pulled off one of the greatest engineering tricks in human history. We'll reveal why Venice is actually sinking right now, faster than you think. And we'll expose the billion-dollar battle happening beneath the waves to save it. 3 things will shock you by the end of this. The method they used to build on water is almost unbelievable. The reason Venice is dying is not what most people say, and the secret weapon built to save it took 16 years and a scandal you won't forget. Let me show you exactly how this happened. Let's go back to the beginning. The year's around 400 AD. The Roman Empire is collapsing. Barbarian armies are sweeping across northern Italy. People are desperate. They're fleeing. And where do they run? Into the water. A group of refugees from cities like Padua and Aquileia make a bold choice. They escape into a shallow lagoon on Italy's northeastern coast. The water's murky, the land is soggy, mosquitoes are everywhere. It's the last place any invading army wants to follow. It's perfect. These refugees don't plan to stay forever, but years pass, then decades, then generations. And slowly, these scattered island communities start to build something permanent. Here's the first mini surprise. Venice isn't one island. It's 118 small islands, connected by 400 bridges, cut through by 177 canals. The whole city is basically a giant jigsaw puzzle sitting in a lagoon. And the lagoon itself, it's a strange, magical place. It sits between the Adriatic Sea and the Italian mainland. It's shallow, only about 1 meter deep in most places. Tides push in and out twice a day. The water is constantly moving, constantly alive. But building anything permanent on those islands? And that was the real challenge. The ground under Venice isn't rock. It's layers of silt, clay, and sand, deposited over thousands of years by rivers flowing into the sea. It's soft, it's unstable, and it shifts. Here's mini surprise number 2. The early Venetians had no modern tool, no steel, no concrete mixer, no engineers with degrees. But they figured out a solution that modern scientists still call genius. And that brings us to the first big revelation. Now here's where things get really interesting. Millions of wooden stakes. That's the secret. When Venetians decided to build permanent structures, they drove wooden poles deep into the ground. Not a few poles, millions of them, densely packed together side by side, hammered down until they hit the harder, compressed clay layers far below. Here's the number that will stop you in your tracks. The Rialto Bridge alone, one of Venice's most famous structures, sits on top of 12,000 wooden stakes. 12,000, just for one bridge. The entire city of Venice is estimated to rest on over 10 million wooden poles. Trees were cut from forests across Croatia, Slovenia, and other regions of the Adriatic coast. Entire forests were stripped bare. Hundreds of ships transported wood across the sea for centuries. But wait, wood rots, right? If these poles are sitting in water, shouldn't they have turned to mush by now? Here's where it gets fascinating. The poles are submerged in the mud to deep below the surface. Down there, the conditions are different. The wood is cut off from oxygen. And without oxygen, the bacteria that cause rot can't survive. Over hundreds of years, something remarkable happens. Minerals from the surrounding sediment slowly seep into the wood. The wood petrifies. It becomes hard as stone. Many of these ancient poles are now closer to rock than timber. Builders who have excavated Venice's foundations in modern times have pulled out these ancient poles and found them completely solid. Some have been tested and found stronger than when they were first driven in over 1,000 years ago. Think about that. The city of Venice is essentially standing on a forest, an invisible, petrified forest buried in the mud beneath the lagoon. This changes how you see every building in Venice. Every church, every palace, every narrow alley. Underneath it all, there are thousands of ancient wooden spears holding the whole thing up. But if you think that's crazy, wait until you hear this. Venice didn't just build on water. Venice built a system to control water. The city and the lagoon are not separate things, when they are one system. For centuries, Venetians treated the lagoon as a living machine, and they managed it with an iron fist. Here's something most tourists never know. The lagoon almost killed Venice before the city was fully built. Rivers from the mainland, the Brenta, the Piave, the Sile, were constantly dumping sediment into the lagoon. Over time, the lagoon would have silted up. It would have become a swamp, then dry land. Venice would have been a city on a plain, easy to attack, no, easy to conquer. So between the 14th and 17th centuries, Venetian engineers did something extraordinary. They diverted entire rivers. They rerouted the Brenta and the Piave away from the lagoon, redirecting them to discharge into the open sea instead. This was not a small project. These were major rivers. Diverting them required digging new channels, building embankments, and organizing thousands of workers over decades. The goal was to keep the lagoon clean, deep, and tidal. And it worked. And the lagoon stayed navigable. Venice stayed an island city. Compare that to today. Modern governments spend years arguing over infrastructure projects. Venice's rulers, centuries ago, just decided to move rivers. And they did it. Here's the contrast that hits hard. In the 1600s, Venetian engineers were redirecting rivers to save their city. Today, engineers are spending billions just to keep that same city from going underwater. The problems are different, but the scale of ambition is the same. And there's an insider detail here that most people miss. The Venetian Republic had a dedicated magistracy, a government body called the Magistrato alle Acque, or the Magistrate of the Waters. This was founded in 1501. Its only job was to protect and manage the lagoon. It had the power to override private landowners, overrule local officials, and commandeer resources. The lagoon was treated as a national security asset, not a lake, not a harbor, a strategic resource protected by law. And that system worked for centuries. But then, something changed. This brings us to the most shocking discovery of all. Venice is sinking. You've probably heard that before, but the full story is far more complex and far more alarming than the simple headline suggests. There are two things happening at once, and together they are creating a crisis that even the engineers of old could not have planned for. The first thing is natural. Venice sits on soft sediment. Over thousands of years, and that sediment compresses under the weight of the buildings above. The city slowly sinks. Geologically, this is called subsidence. For most of Venice's history, this sinking happened at a rate of about 1 to 2 millimeters per year. Slow, manageable. But in the 20th century, something drastically accelerated the sinking. Industry. In the 1920s, a large industrial zone called Porto Marghera was built on the edge of the lagoon. Factories, refineries, chemical plants. And to power those factories, to supply them with water, engineers drilled deep wells into the aquifers, underground water reserves, beneath the lagoon. When you pump water out of the ground above compresses. It sinks. Between the 1950s and 1970s, Venice was sinking at 5 times its natural rate. 5 times. In some areas, the city dropped by as much as 23 centimeters in just a few decades. 23 centimeters doesn't sound like much, but in a city sitting barely above sea level, it is catastrophic. And here's the second thing happening at the same time. Sea levels are rising. Global temperatures are increasing. The Adriatic Sea is expanding and climbing. The floods that used to hit Venice once or twice a year are now hitting dozens of times a year. Acqua alta, the Italian term for high water, is the term Venetians use for these flood events. In 1900, Acqua alta happened about 10 times a year. By 2000, it was happening over 100 times a year. In November 2019, Venice experienced its worst flood in over 50 years. Water reached 187 centimeters above sea level. St. Mark's Basilica, one of the most treasured buildings in the world, was flooded for the 4th time in its history. The first 3 times happened over 1,000 years. The 4th happened within 20 years of the 3rd. The city that survived the fall of Rome, of the Black Death and Napoleon, is being undone by water. So what does all this mean for us today? The situation in Venice is not just a local problem. it's a preview. Hundreds of cities around the world sit at or near sea level. Miami, Mumbai, Bangkok, Jakarta, Ho Chi Minh City, Shanghai. All of them face rising seas. All of them are watching what happens in Venice. Venice is the test case, the place where humanity is spending the most money, applying the most engineering creativity, and learning the hardest lessons about how to keep a city alive in the face of water. The short-term response is something called MOSE. That stands for Modulo Sperimentale Elettromeccanico, or in English, the Experimental Electromechanical Module. It's a system of 78 giant metal floodgates installed at the 3 inlets where the Adriatic Sea enters the lagoon. When a major flood is predicted, the gates are raised. They stand up from the seafloor and block the incoming tide. The lagoon stays calm. Venice stays dry. In theory, this is brilliant. In practice, it took 16 years to build. Construction started in 2003 and finished in 2020. It cost 5.5 billion euros, and it was plagued by corruption scandals so serious that investigators arrested dozens of officials and contractors. Here's the personal takeaway for every viewer. Venice teaches us that great engineering is only half the battle. The other half is politics, accountability, and the will to see a project through. The barriers that threatened Venice most were not made of water. They were made of human failure, but MOSE does work. When tested during storm events since 2020, the system has successfully blocked multiple dangerous flood events, including tides that would have caused catastrophic damage. Venice bought itself time, but engineers are honest about the limits. MOSE was designed for sea level rise of 22 centimeters above 1987 baselines. Current projections suggest that by 2100, sea levels could rise by far more than that. The city is in a race, and the finish line keeps moving. Before we wrap up, there's one final thing you need to know. Here's the twist that reframes everything. Venice was never supposed to be permanent. The refugees who first fled into the lagoon in 400 AD planned to leave once the danger passed. They built temporary shelters on islands of mud and reeds. They kept their eyes on the mainland, waiting for the storms of history to calm. But the city grew. It thrived. It became the most powerful trading empire in the medieval world. At its peak, Venice controlled the spice trade, the Silk Road routes, and the entire Eastern Mediterranean economy. The city that started as a desperate refuge became the richest city on earth. And now, 1,600 years after those first refugees arrived, Venice faces the same question they did. Do you stay or do you go? Some Venetians are leaving. The permanent population has dropped from 175,000 in the 1950s to around 50,000 today. Young people move to the mainland for jobs, for normal life, for dry floors. The city that once drew people in is now slowly emptying out, but others stay, and they stay with a fierce pride. They repair their buildings after floods. They carry groceries through knee-deep water. They argue passionately about MOSE, about tourism, about the future of their city. Venice didn't survive for 1,600 years because of perfect engineering. It survived because of people who refused to give up. That is the real magic of Venice. If this opened your eyes to what a city can survive, let's bring it all together. Venice was built on 10 million petrified wooden poles driven into a lagoon bed, and that ancient solution still holds the city up today. The Venetian Republic moved entire rivers to protect their lagoon, making one of the boldest infrastructure decisions in history. And today, Venice faces a dual threat: natural subsidence made worse by 20th century industry, combined with rising seas driven by climate change. The MOSE flood barrier system is working, but it was born out of scandal, delay, and corruption, reminding us that human failures can be just as dangerous as natural ones. If you found this story as mind-blowing as I did, hit that subscribe button. Every week we go deep on the cities, structures, and moments that shape civilization, and the hidden forces behind them. And here's a question for the comments. If Venice had not been founded by refugees fleeing an empire's collapse, do you think cities like it would have ever been built? Would humans have dared to build on water at all? Drop your answer below. I read every single one. Next up, watch our video on how Amsterdam pulled off its own impossible engineering feat, building a modern city on a swamp. The Dutch solution is just as wild as Venice's, and it's still being used today.